Hello, hello, everyone. How's it going? I'm super excited for the conversation we're about to have today. Got some really awesome guests. If everyone wants to throw in the chat where you're tuning in from, would love to see where everyone's joining us from. And just a couple housekeeping items that I want to go through. First of all, what we're going to be covering here today is some tools that are going to help AEs close deals and also how revenue operations can support them. And we're going to be covering the optimal tech stack, building a cohesive tech stack, how to boost efficiency with revenue operations, and then actually measuring that impact. But with those housekeeping items, we're going to first throw a poll in the chat here and want to get an answer from everyone from that's in attendance. Are AEs in your organization required to source a portion of their pipeline? I think this is a hot topic right now. So super excited to see the responses here on the poll. And then we'll jump right into things as we're getting those responses. Yes, we see yes from a few folks. Awesome, awesome, awesome. That's good to see. I think I agree with that. I think AE should be required to source some of their pipeline, right? If everyone will see on the screen here, we're going to pull up a couple things, but first things first, you're going to see a few resources for this webinar, as well as a link to follow us on LeadIQ if everyone could. And then this webinar will be recorded and we will be sending it out. So look out for that recording after the webinar. So let's jump into it. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome our guests. So I'm going to pass it over to our guests to introduce themselves. Jeff, why don't you start us off and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, I get to join you guys cheating a little bit. Know Sean back from our days at Conga. Moved from Conga over to Procore. Some exciting announcements about where I'm going to be next. That's a LinkedIn, but it's run revenue operations functions from Informatica to Conga to Procore and a number of different companies. And look forward to joining you today. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, Jeff. Super excited to have you here. And Adam, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself now?
Greetings from San Francisco. I am a sales manager over at Gong. I've been here coming up on 6 years. Started as an SDR on the ranks, launched the EMEA office, and now I'm in SF and lead a commercial team. Yeah, super excited to chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam, for joining us. And last but certainly not least, Mike Lynch, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right, John. Mike Lynch. I'm an AE over at LeadIQ. Calling in Denver office today, but live in the great New Hampshire. I'm super excited to chat with Jeff today at the topics we get from.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you so much. So let's jump into the topics here to get us started. So everyone knows that selling is completely changing, and now we're entering this era of tools and tech stacks that are helping teams do their job a lot more efficiently. So I want to open it up with a little bit of a hot take. So let's pull up that first poll that we want to discuss here and I want to get everyone's take from our guests here. But with the pressure on AEs to source their own pipeline, do we believe it's negatively impacting their ability to close deals? So I want to get Jeff's take on this to begin. What do you think, Jeff? Do you think that it's negatively affecting them to close their own deals?
No, in fact, I think one of the highest close rates that exist tends to be from CS or AE source pipeline. So I don't think that it's hurting their ability to close deals. In fact, I think arguably it may be helping them in terms of close rates. That said, the hesitation that you may see in my tone is I think you started off by saying, hey, the economy has shifted a little bit. The role of sales has shifted. It's harder and harder to get to your number. And I think that there's a lot of things that we are adding on to the plate of sellers that makes it harder for them to hit their number, to close the deals that they need. I don't know that prospecting is one of them. I expect in every company that I've been a part of, AEs are certainly responsible for prospecting. I think again, that and CS source pipeline and partner tends to be the three highest converting. I think we have to be a little cautious of the work that we're giving to the various AEs, but in this particular one, I don't think that sourcing pipeline would be hurting them.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. And totally agree there. And it's really cool on this webinar. We've got a bunch of different perspectives. We've got revenue operations, we've got a seller, and then we've got a sales leader. Adam, would love to get your take on this as well.
I thought Jeff brought up a lot of good points. The dynamics have shifted a ton. It's a lot harder to sell today than it is. And I do think that anytime you add something to your team's plate or to your plate as a seller, something has to be removed on the back end. So we are adding work, right, with a necessity. The reality is I firmly believe, I know that the tools are better. The data that we're getting is better. So we're making it easier for people to source their own pipeline. And to Jeff's point, every sales leader I've spoken with, and we talked to thousands at Gong, your own self-source pipeline is going to be faster. It's going to have higher ACV. You're going to talk to the right people. So it's actually narrowing your focus into better accounts. So I think what it's doing is it's exposing people that didn't have that muscle and really enjoyed the tailwind we had 2018 to 2021. And those that were continuously prospecting during that time already have that muscle and they're standing out. I think it's going to negatively impact people that don't have that muscle and need to adapt quickly. But those that were prospecting already in the past, they're still at the top of the leaderboard.
Definitely, definitely. Great points. Mike, how about you? Your take on this as a
I think
seller?
so. As a and I'm hitting on it, right? I think when you think about outbound deals versus outbound deals, you understand when you're putting together a POV early on in the sales process, you are likely faster cycle. You're going to know more about the business up front. I think where things are a little bit different is there's now in for more time management skills as an AE. There's more for short prioritization, more RevOps towards the execution. Where am I going to focus on? Because it does demand a higher win rate because you don't have the luxury of spending more time on other deals or in that and find things. I don't think it's necessarily making it harder to sell, harder to close, but absolutely requiring other skills from selling.
100%. And I think that brings us into that's a great segue into our next topic and talking through some of the challenges that AEs are facing right now with sourcing their own pipeline and closing their deals. And I know, Adam, you got some great insight with this specific question. So I'd love to get your take on that.
I think and I was actually an AE in this like transition period where it became massively important to source your own pipeline. I personally think the biggest thing we have to think about is efficiency. And I think the biggest efficiency blocker right now is just context switching and folks just doing a million things at once. I can speak only for Gong sales motion, right? But we run pilots with our customers. We're sourcing pipeline. We're handling renewals. We don't have a ton of SE support. We're still a startup, despite this, the fact we've gone to market for 7-8 years. So the context switching is really the most difficult part. So I think that requires on one hand, a necessity to be laser focused, which only you can do. Some people love their calendar blocks, turning off all notifications. There's those little tips and tricks. And then the other side is tool consolidation, right? And obviously we're going to plug our own tools here, but when I was an AE, I had Gong for reviewing calls and getting better. I had Outreach for Sales Loft, and you have Clarity for forecasting. You're just bouncing between tabs. Right now we can do that all under the same hood. And then with a plugin like LeadIQ, you can do all your sourcing that way as well. So I think that's the main thing, is allow you to be tunnel vision and have focus in that one area. That's the key area that I'm seeing the best people operationalize around.
Yes, tunnel vision and having an integrated tech stack is what I'm getting. What I think you mean is just having a tech stack that works well together, and so you don't have to have multiple tabs open in order to do your role, right? I think that's huge. And Jeff, you brought up something that I think is a great point that no one likes to talk about with the macroeconomics. So why don't we dive into that a little bit and how that's challenging?
Yeah. I think, look, anybody that's out there in the world of sales, particularly if you're in software sales, I think is feeling it. The economy has shifted. The gravy train that was up until about 2-3 years ago, I think everybody feels something a little different. And I think what's shifted is that capital is more expensive, right? So when you're buying software, typically they're either capital or operating expenses. Often they're capital expenses. Interest rates are significantly higher than they have been. It just means that the hurdle rate and the profitability that companies need to prove to buy software is harder than before. The companies are seeing, and I'm just seeing this across all sales organizations, fewer and fewer reps are hitting plan. Sales cycles are longer. Initial deal sizes are smaller. Deals that used to be approved by directors and companies are now requiring approval, sometimes at CEO and sometimes at board level, which is pretty unprecedented. And look, there's been this looming fear of a recession for 3 years, 4 years now. It hasn't happened yet, but companies are still as cautious as though it were happening. And look, there was a proliferation of software for a very long period of time, and software was reasonably easy to sell. So when I look back at 3, 4 years ago and working at companies that were posting 30, 40, 50% year over year growth, look, those things felt really good, but they were also really common at that time. They're not common anymore. And if you look at attainment curves in most companies, you're looking at most sales organizations are hitting 30, 40, sometimes 50, but more often 30, 40% of their reps that are hitting plan. It's a tough world and it's hard for sellers. And I think Adam really hit the nail on the head with talking about how to get more out of the tools that you're using to ensure that you can be more efficient in your go-to-market, because the opposite is happening right now, which is what boards are worried and nervous about sales and bookings numbers. Growth will ultimately triangulate with what your bookings growth is. That's making CEOs and CROs nervous. They're beating up their VPs of sales, who are beating up their RSDs, who are beating up their AEs. And we're just requiring more and more from our AEs. How many AEs are out there that have been enabled and then re-enabled and then re-enabled again, and only to say, hey, we need 100 different types of account plans from you ASAP. And by the way, go enter all this data in Salesforce. And we're actually ironically taking sellers out of the field where they need to go spend time with customers to generate sales results. So we need efficiency of tool sets, but we also have to be really cautious of doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on things that are taking and removing sellers from their customers where they can be most effective.
100%. And you brought up a great point, and with who needs to be involved in a deal cycle these days, right? You need to be able to sell to procurement. You need to be able to sell to revenue operations. You need to be able to sell to CFOs and C-suite, right? Because you need to tie into a business initiative and a business challenge that is going to be felt by those level folks. So Mike, I would love to get your perspective on the challenges as a seller and what you're facing.
So I think, Jeff, I think there's really compelling about, okay, how does he approach the macro conditions? CFOs do every single deal, and every single organization is trying to consolidate some, right? The days are, you go back to so many companies were at growth at all costs. You could steamroll your way in from an outbound business. That doesn't exist anymore. There are accounts that you have in your territory that simply are only going to be able to buy in a cycle, and you're going to need to replace existing spec, right? So I think with that, there's such a greater importance on account prioritization and how can you use the tools that you have, and how can you get assistance from RevOps to figure out not just how can I work so effectively, but where should I be spending my time? Where are the companies in my that are actually in cycle? Because, like I said, the days of just steamrolling your anywhere and create budget, there's not.
Definitely. It's definitely gotten harder and harder to close business these days. And we did a hot take on this, how AE sourcing their own pipeline negatively affects their ability to close deals. And everyone said a resounding no. But what do we think the impact of AE's abilities to source pipeline and close deals? Is there a correlation between those two? Love to get your take on that, Adam.
Yeah, I think it's a zero-sum game, right? I mentioned that already. Anything that we add, we have to subtract something else. So we're requiring people to be more efficient. We're requiring people to be more focused. And what I'm finding is the best people are becoming much more strategic with their time. It's weeding out people that need to be told what to do again. So the cream is still rising. The lift feels heavier, but it's funny. I've heard the term bull market reps and bear market reps. Like in a bull market, right? Most people can go and sell, right? It's again, to Jeff's point, right? The interest rates are virtually zero. I sold in those days. It was great. I thought I was better than I really am. But in this market, right, everyone's tried and true. And it's been a sobering experience. But the reality is there's still reps at every org I talk to hitting 300%. Gong has this president's club coming up and it's going to be a packed group in Costa Rica, right? So the question is, how do you become more efficient and know where to hunt? And again, to Jeff's point, go after those big whales, right? You should know who to hunt and you should be sinking your teeth into those accounts. That's really the important thing. I think that's the biggest area. The other thing I'll say for a lot of organizations, looking internally and promoting from the SDR org is going to be really effective, and get those people that know that motion. You can teach them how to close and build an army of SDRs that continue to graduate and grow. That's something I look around at the people. It's like, look at Michael's background, right? He's got 4 promos in less than 5 years, right? That's someone that knows the ins and outs of the organization. So people like that at your org are more valuable now than ever.
Totally agree. And selfishly, as a sales development leader that loves to promote his reps, I totally agree with that, Adam. So thank you for bringing that up. But Jeff, I would love to get your perspective, because there's a topic that just keeps getting brought up, and that's account prioritization. So how do you feel like RevOps can support sales from an account prioritization?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's the job of, and there's different titles in different organizations. So I want to be a little cautious of that, but revenue operations, sometimes sales operations, I think it's the job of that function to help the team become more effective, right? So I've always said to my teams that our goal is to be a force multiplier to sales, CS, marketing. And I think one of the core things that we can do is go work with marketing, ensure that sales is working with marketing to really understand our ICPs and the accounts that we have to win in, to then be able to compare those to the existing set of accounts that we have. And I think Adam and Mike both use the term prioritization, prioritize those accounts. And that's going to be largely based on data. The LeadIQ, the HG Insights, the Zoom Infos, even though you probably don't want me to use that third one. Look, data is incredibly and foundationally important to being able to help understand what's the technographic, infographic data associated with your account. By the way, hierarchy is also an important thing there. What accounts are subsidiaries of what accounts? Most companies most account reps are selling at the parent level, meaning, hey, I'm going to sell at this level and including the subsidiaries below it. And it's incredibly important that we understand our data, that we can prioritize our accounts, and that one of the ways of getting better, I talk a lot about the economic headwinds. One of the ways of getting better is to get more focused and get better at what we do. So Adam's not alone in saying like, he felt like he was probably better than he was. I think many people were probably getting better results than they were actually driving in terms of effort. We have to get better, more targeted, more focused on what accounts we're going after, why we're going after them, what we're going to say when we get in touch with them. And that is the job of RevOps, is to help prioritize those accounts and to make sure that every single day, here's a question that I think every single person should be able to answer. That's a seller on this call. When you wake up every single day, what are those accounts that you're going to call on that are going to go make a difference? Can you answer that question? I bet you the vast majority of sellers cannot. There are a bunch of accounts in their patch, and I'm going to go and spray and pray and throw a bunch of people into a cadence and hope that somebody responds. I think there's a real importance to that question of what accounts am I going after? Why am I going after them? And what am I going to say when I get there? That's going to make a difference. And that's how we're going to change the tide. And the good reps that use systems, that use processes are going to have no problem. I agree 100%. There's still reps hitting 200-300% of their number. That's because they're disciplined and they're focused and they're data driven. The ones that are spraying brain and trying the old tactics that maybe got you to your plan a couple of years ago, it's not going to work anymore. And so wake up every single day going, what are the most high priority accounts that I have to go after? And if you can't answer that question, please work with your RevOps leader, because your RevOps leader should be supporting that data.
Yeah, Jeff. And I take it even one step further and say, why now? I think that's where a lot of outreach misses the boat, and the signals that we look for in order to consider it a good account is to be able to answer that question. Why is good, but why now, I think, is really important. Why are you reaching out to them at this point in time? So, Adam, I'd love to get your perspective on some of the data points that you consider gold to consider it a good account. Like it's a good account to target. What are some things that you look for?
Yeah, I think I get nervous. I'm speaking specific to our world, but I think obviously our sweet spot is SaaS organizations and anyone with a growing sales team. So those are signals we look for. And if you have a demo button on your website, there's someone that's fielding that. They're managing conversions. They can improve there. That's really big for us. I'll plug a tool that we use a lot as well. So another really big signal is past users. Folks typically go to companies that are similar in shape and tech stack and so on. So that's another signal. We use user gems for that to help give those signals. So those are some things we look at. And then there's really the battle between, do we prioritize the size of prize or propensity to buy? And to me, it's a sweet spot in the middle, right? Your marquees are going to have both. And then your tier ones that are just beneath that are going to have a little bit of one and a lot of the other. But I think that those are the main things I look for.
Definitely. Great points. I think that's what a lot of reps have a challenge with is like, why is this a good account? What do I need to be looking for? Why do I consider it a good? Why did RevOps consider this a tier 0 or a tier 1? And what do I need to be looking for? So, Mike, we brought up a lot of things about tech stack and everything like that and the challenges around selling today. So I'd love to get your perspective on how an integrated tech stack can help you as a seller overcome some of these challenges.
Yeah. I think there's a really important delineation that you need to think when you think about like the account executive goal and well, using consumer technology, right? Um, enterprise or strategic sellers are going to incredibly differently and, commercial or an SMB rep has a much larger, and as a result, priority is incredibly important, both roles. But the way that people use technology to prioritize and also execute, I think it's very different, right? So just taking a look at like LeadIQ and our one, I think under once you have to have a process for prioritizing, like more data driven. Adam talked about some of the points he looks at. I won't look, I won't reference all of the super LeadIQ specific things. Try to match stories a lot. Hey, this is the reason why this customer bought. Looks like this company, that mold name. But I think it's important to confirm that is to move on to the very concrete process and technology where you're actually executing once you have the priority. The enterprise being completely candid. I see very I revenue operations and seller organization every day in my sales process. And I see a massive gap in the way enterprise sellers adopt technology compared to more down market. So now I'm not sure the webinar necessarily wants to hear, but I think there's less of a need to leverage technology efficient necessarily in the execution stage of a prospecting journey, the enterprise base, because so many of these sellers, they almost have their own processes. The way that they build their territory plan, et cetera, it's so much kind of live Excel the systems. It's not necessarily about how getting the job done. It's more in what is the job because you're so focused to be 10 accounts. So I guess to kind of conclude, I see technology like a far greater impact more down market because of the amount of volume you're going to have to execute on. Whereas up market data points are in priority and relevant. Hey, now I think that's the it's fuel for a seller as opposed to technology. That thing that can to the next level and number.
Yeah. From my perspective, I think that tools should help sellers spend more time on revenue generating activities, not focused on the admin work, so to speak. So, Adam, I'd love to get your take on some ways that you're helping your team, focus on revenue generating activities. And what are some tools that help alleviate some of those admin tasks that we see on a day to day basis?
Yeah. I'm going to have to shamelessly and proudly plug our platform. When I think about what are the things that drove me crazy as a rep, like one of the main things was just CRM inputs and like constantly having to plug things in afterwards. And we're building, and luckily we have cutting edge, like the stuff that's getting released in 6 to 9 months. Our ability to like auto update medic fields, for example, is incredible. Auto update if the opportunity is competitive or not. And then we also have a GPT type functionality, right? Account based AI, where I as a manager can go in and say, I'm the CEO of Gong. I'm meeting with their CEO. What do I need to know? And it gives me a brief of everything that's happened in that opportunity. It's really sophisticated. So that's one area where we're taking things away. Call follow-ups, right? It's something that's really simple. And I know, Sean, you're nodding your head. You probably used it in Gong or had your team use it. It's incredible. And I think my guidance to anyone listening is let that AI take you down 90% of the way, and then add your flavor, make it sound like you said it on top of that. Right? So you break through the noise. No one likes reading an email that's obviously AI, but man, that's so much time back just in those two areas, right? So the CRM inputs and then the follow-up, like just that alone is going to be really epic. And then another plug, right? From a prospecting motion, I would find a contact on LinkedIn. I'd have to go to a Seamless or something, trying to find their number. I would manually, people aren't going to believe this. I would manually create that contact and put in every field. It was like so ridiculous. And now we can do it all within one click within a Chrome extension with LeadIQ, pulls straight from LinkedIn. It's just a huge efficiency. So while we add more to their plate in terms of the expectation, we're actually removing a ton of the burden that they had. And that's just my purview. I'm sure Jeff, you and Michael probably have other things that you can see.
Yeah, Jeff, I'd love to get your take on this. And from your perspective, how can RevOps alleviate some of that admin work?
Yeah, I think that we've got to make sure that we are, again, we already talked about helping to use data to prioritize accounts, but that we're looking at the tech stack holistically and making sure that, and this will also be a bit of a plug for Adam, but that we're looking to make sure that we are eliminating kind of multiple panes of glass that reps and sellers have to look through in order to get their job done. There's so much consolidation that's going on, and Gong, and I think Adam mentioned a few of them, but Gong and Clary and Outreach, and they've all pretty massively consolidated to be able to do the conversational intelligence piece, which is incredibly important, by the way. One of the more valuable tools that I think that I've seen sellers use. The old day of the sales leader coming in and plugging in their headset, by the way, I'm really dating myself here, but plugging in their headset in the cubicle where somebody's making an outbound call and then giving real-time coaching, like it just doesn't exist anymore. And it also just really doesn't scale very well. So like conversational intelligence is incredibly important. Be able to use the translation from those transcripts and to be able to forecast deals is a natural kind of extension of that. And then be able to integrate the kind of cadence outreach tools as part of it. I know Gong's gone down that road. Clary's gone down that road. Outreach. There's other niche players like Avizo that are in the space that have done that as well. And I think that we've got to look as ops leaders to make sure that we are consolidating the tool set and make it simpler and simpler for the rep to not have to go out. I mentioned earlier that we're like doubling, tripling down on like having reps go enter data into a system. Like the system should be entering its own data at this point. And if your tech stack isn't modern enough to where entering your medic fields for you, to Adam's point, like then your RevOps leader should maybe be looking at like how to add technology to make the life of the rep a little easier. So I think our job is just that. It's one, we've got to look at data and make sure we understand that we're pointing the direction of prioritization of accounts. And two, that across, both execution and then what I might call insights from the data, that we're looking at consolidation of tech stacks, and that we are making it simpler and simpler for reps to not have to sit there and key a bunch of data entry, manually key in contacts. I remember those days as well. And I think if you find that you're a seller and you're manually keying in data for entering a new contact, or every time you have a conversation with somebody, you're manually entering your notes into a system, or you're manually updating the medic fields that you may have in Salesforce, I think that's really time for an organization to say, where are we asking our reps to spend our time? And is that scalable? And I think that's where if I was seeing those things in a RevOps function where I was supporting a sales org, I would certainly look to consolidate and modernize our tool set.
Definitely. Definitely. I think at this point, it's so important to be focused on your customers and spending as much time with your customers because deal cycles are longer, because it's harder to sell, because there's more people involved. Your time is being spent more so on deals than before. So we've got to, like Adam said, it's a zero sum game, take it away from somewhere else. Right. So this brings us up into our next hot take. Right. And I think this is going to be a pretty controversial one. So the hot take is there is a tool to solve every single problem. How do we feel about that? So I'd love to get your perspective, Mike, from a seller's point of view.
Long story short, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. And I think if you take a look at tools available, I think at each organization, you probably could find it to solve not every problem. And I think there are certain components that there's some data we're just not going to be able to get rid of entirely. There is works within the system you're using. But I think the biggest issue is think about like enterprise sellers. Enterprise sellers develop their products. And when enterprise really the first role, we're no longer graduation track, right? There's a lot of work enterprise sellers. It's a career. You develop your systems, how you use tools to build territory plans, build your account strategy. And right now, I truly think that there's no one solution that's going to enable every enterprise seller to their territory plans, prioritize their accounts the way that they will need to moving from company to company. I think there's a level of optimization that is wired when you're prioritizing your accounts, you're building your territories. And I think that is the gap up market you're going to have a more difficult time solving. And that's why you see more enterprise sellers be reluctant to adopt technology and end up building out these plans in spreadsheets because there isn't genuinely a system that is across all of these companies that sellers may move from.
Definitely, Mike. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, they got to where they are because of their processes. It's going to be very hard to get them to change. So you've got to make those accommodations for those specific types of sellers. We see reps in their earlier in their career, they're a lot more nimble. They're more able to adopt that technology a little bit more. Would love to get your perspective, Adam, from your team's perspective. Do you feel like there's a tool out there that can solve every challenge your team is facing right now?
I think the more monotonous and like simple-minded the problem, you should be looking for tools in AI to solve it. I mentioned this earlier with a follow-up email AI summarization, right? Like use AI and tools to make you much more efficient, but do not forget as sellers, the number one thing you can do is be different. It's like the most important thing. I've been on buying committees. I've never actually bought software. So Jeff, I'd love your perspective, but if you don't stand out and someone isn't looking forward to that next meeting with you, your deal cycles are going to elongate. They're going to go with someone else. You have to add value. You have to be prepared. And all of that you can get enhanced with AI and with tools, but it's not going to replicate it. And that's why, again, what I'm seeing is the best reps are really shining right now. We're seeing a ton of that, right? Just, it's almost like these tools and AI allow people to be lazier, right? You feel more comfortable because you did send a follow-up, right? But let's not forget, not all follow-ups created equal and everything marginally matters. And in sales, the difference between P club and a tip can be 5%, 8% on what you produce. I think there are tools to solve more than ever. I think you should lean into tools to solve almost everything. Again, the tech stack we have here with Gong plus LeadIQ is phenomenal and we're super efficient. But if you think that's the answer, you're just going to have a lot of fun.
Definitely. I totally agree. And I think what it comes down to is that you have to figure out how to do it manually before you try to automate it. You need to make sure you understand the process behind the automation before you try to automate everything. Jeff, from your perspective, we are in this day and age of automate everything. There's a tool for everything, right? Oh, we can fix that with this tool. Would love to get your perspective from RevOps, like what you're seeing in the marketplace in terms of tool adoption, or is it more process focused?
Yeah, I think to answer that question, is there a tool for everything? I'm going to be pretty blatant that the answer is no. Look, I'm a person obviously in RevOps that appreciates that there are tools for lots and lots of things. And I wish that we could find a place where Mike and Adam and I would be disagreeing. That'd be probably more fun. But I think we're in pretty violent agreement again. I don't think that there's a tool for everything. I think, look, selling is an art. I think that there's a lot of AI articles in particular out there that talk about the proposition that AI will replace sellers at some point. And I may be the old guy in the room, that may be the naysayer that says, I don't think so. I don't think so. I just really don't. It's hard for me to imagine, at least in my career span, that computers are going to be able to take the soft skills of sellers, the EQ portion of it. They say that the old expression is, I think, true, that selling is 1/3 IQ and 2/3 EQ. And I really, truly do believe that is true. So is there a tool that can handle all the EQ aspects of selling? No, 0% today. Are there things that can give you intelligence around what you're doing and what you could do better, and maybe illuminate some of the blind spots that we all have about the things that we do? For sure. And we should embrace those tools and try to become more efficient with them. But I do not think that there's a tool for everything. I think that there's a tool for important things, and we have to figure out as RevOps leaders what those important tool sets are. I think RevOps leaders, and I'll do a little bit of a segue here. RevOps leaders, I think, can get pretty reactive in terms of what they're doing. If you look at the term revenue and operations, what doesn't touch either of those? It's kind of everything. And so I think RevOps leaders need to take a step back and say, hey, am I really reactive, or am I proactively serving as a force multiplier to sales, marketing, CS? If reactive, then congrats, you're in the majority, and you are becoming an expert at playing a game called whack-a-mole that gets exhausting after a period of time. Take a step back and try to figure out what are those things that we should be doing proactively to be a force multiplier to sales, to marketing, to CS, that we can do to truly move the needle. But there's not a tool set for everything. We just got to figure out what the right tool sets are that will really help move the needles for whatever business you run.
Yeah. And that brings us to a great point, Jeff. So like you said, revenue and operations is pretty much touching absolutely everything. So how do you foster those relationships as a revenue operations leaders with those other departments? And because I think it takes a team, it takes a village, right? So how are you building those relationships with those different departments, and how important is that?
Yeah, I think by definition, if somebody's in a function called revenue operations, then that typically means that you're sitting between sales, CS, marketing, and most often finance. And just you build relationships with them just by nature of having to do work with them. I think you'll find that those departments will appreciate RevOps leaders that take a proactive approach to saying, hey, we're going to go drive these 3, 4, 5 things that are going to create a meaningful difference for the business this year. And I would invite all RevOps leaders to ask your teams. I knowingly ask the people that are on my team this question: how do we define success this year? It's really easy for a seller, for Mike or for Adam, to say, hey, what's success? And they'll probably say something related to their quota and their performance relative to their quota or their team's quotas. It's much harder in RevOps. Well, how do you define success? Well, I can use hey, did my team hit their quota? That's a little bit of a cop out. I think we need to be able to point more directly to what things did we allow the business to achieve. And therefore the company, the RevOps function needs to take a really proactive stance and say, hey, we're going to go accomplish these X number of things that are going to really move the needle for the business this year. And I think that's probably the most important thing that RevOps leaders can do, is become proactive, not reactive, and to make sure that you are focused on a handful of things that will meaningfully move the needle for the business. Building relationships with marketing, with CS, et cetera. I think they just are a natural byproduct of what the role is. Building relationships with sellers can be harder. And I think that, pardon my expression here, but I think sellers can have a stronger BS meter than other functions perhaps. And I think that being able to work closely with a Mike or closely with an Adam is going to depend on the value that they get out of working with you. So if you're a RevOps leader and you're finding that you're not really engaged with the sales team, caution, that probably means they're not finding a lot of value out of you. But the more value you can provide through that proactivity by saying, we're going to go accomplish X, Y, Z, when you truly start providing value, sellers will lean into the stuff that you're doing in RevOps. And if they're not leaning in, it's probably a pretty good indication that they're not finding a lot of value.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And I want to reel it back a little bit and get Mike and Adam's opinion on this. Like, what is, from your perspective as a sales leader and a seller, what are the tools that you absolutely cannot live without? What are your foundational tools? So I'll hand it off to Adam first.
We eat, sleep, and breathe in Gong. It's where we prospect. It's where we get better. It's where we forecast. I've been here long enough. I should have a Gong tattoo. That's obviously huge. The integration of LeadIQ is powerful. And it's funny, one of my reps was just on Lead, and I spent some time prospecting into their book to get a sense for what it was like. And I think we should raise our pipeline targets because of how good the tools are together. Yeah, those are the main things. I'd also say gifting is really important. So whatever tool you're using there, if you can send a really personalized gift, again, that's going to stand up to the noise. That's booked a lot of pipeline for us as well. Sendoso that we use, Alice, is good as well. So those, and I'd mentioned user gems as well. But again, the main plug, and obviously it's just funding this enterprise today, is LeadIQ and Gong.
Yeah, it's really interesting to get your perspective because yours is all around pipeline and closing deals and everything like that. I'm sure Jeff would have a different perspective, but Mike, I want to pass it over to you as a seller. What are some tools in your day to day that you can't live without?
As a seller, absolutely agree with that. Just no way. The efficiency that Gong enables, more so than efficiency, just ensuring anything becomes a requirement. I think intelligence absolutely a requirement. It's of course IQ, of course intact data. I think IQ is so incredible in my work because it costs so much time on the prioritization organization of how am I to penetrate these ground so that the process be doing so, it needs to be so efficient. And obviously, I think the best thing that one in LinkedIn navigator, we live in a world where human, we have access to a human capital database that is updated in real time by its users. The days of old contact data where you look up, you make a phone call, you get the right person, that is work. And I so incredibly powerful to know that, hey, before working on an opportunity, any sort of engagement, I can map out buying team. I don't have to rely on org chart that may or may not be, it might miss that here later. I can figure it out right there on LinkedIn. So I think that's huge requirements. And I think the market is absolutely adopted LinkedIn. They're so true days of B2B sales world. Outside, I think one more, when you're working in enterprise strategic space, you need some sort of platform, whether it's a Lucid Charts, a Miro, or you can execute some of the same sort of stuff and in Google Sheets, but you need some component account mapping and territory planning to be able to build your own charts and to be able to put together and visualize like, hey, your timeline. This is how you're going to attack units. So I one few different technologies use. I think that's a major requirement for up marketers.
Definitely. Totally agree. And Jeff, I'd love to get your perspective. If you were to work at a startup and there was no tech out there, right? And you were building the tech stack from scratch, how would you think about technology and how would you break it down? What categories would you section them in and what tools would you put those in?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's certainly a broad question. I think I would, and I mentioned these terms earlier. I think I would think in probably the buckets of data and execution, and then an intelligence would be probably the three buckets. And within those buckets, in data, I would look for some sort of a foundation to our data platform that will help me understand. And again, there's HG Insights, there's LeadIQ, there's others out there that will help me understand the right technographic, firmographic, infographic data that I need to really understand account hierarchies, what accounts are subsidiaries to what other accounts. I think that's important for most sellers, and it's important in the way that you design most territories. In the execution space, you clearly would have to have a CRM, although I'm not so positive that in the future you will need a CRM. It feels like there's a lot of things moving in and around and beyond potentially the CRM. But in today's world, I think you need a CRM. You need a conversational intelligence tool for sure. It's really impossible, I think, to do coaching feedback or to gain insights into who it is that you're talking to without that kind of a tool. You for sure need a forecasting tool. Whether or not you actually need a cadence tool, Gong has one, Outreach has one, Clary has one, Aviso has one. Whether or not you need that, I'm not so sure anymore. I don't know that they convert. There are so many people being put into so many cadences. And as a RevOps leader, I'm the recipient, obviously, of many of these cadences. I think I show up as a buying persona for many. You just get so inundated with so many messages that are in theory one-to-one communications that I'm not sure they work anymore. So whether or not you need that, I think would be dependent on the company, but caution there that if you can't show some insights or a way to simplify the messaging, don't bother sending the message because it's not going to stand out. If it's just that kind of typical marketing speak, I wouldn't even send it out. And then in terms of insights and intelligence, these first two will blur between execution and intelligence, but there's also things like demand-based and sixth sense. And if I was a startup company, I would go look heavily at the demand bases and sixth senses of the world. What those will provide you is help in defining what your ICP is or how your accounts map to the accounts that you should be selling to, but they'll also help you with intent data signals from those accounts. And especially as a startup or as an earlier stage company, look, your marketing budgets are more limited. Being able to intercept the marketing budgets from other people that are driving customers into the market is hugely important. You could have a competitor that's much, much larger than you, that's spending much more dollars than you could ever spend, driving people into the market. And a sixth sense or demand base would help you intercept those intent signals to be able to engage with customers that are actually in market for your solutions. And then of course, in my world, I believe that what gets measured gets improved, and the Power BIs and Tableaus of the world, I think, are incredibly important. So if I was going to build a tech stack from the ground up, it'd be data execution and intelligence. I've talked about the parts that go into those. There are many other parts. We tend to be very sales focused in this call. Many other parts around CS and around enablement and around lots of other things that I would look at as well. But for sales, that I think I named the ones that would be important.
Definitely. And I'd like to piggyback off of that because Adam brought this up earlier. And I think this is a great perspective that many folks would like to get from you, Jeff, because you're involved in the buying cycle as a revenue operations leader. What are you looking for from the seller? What are you looking for from a tool perspective? What is it like selling to you of the world?
I always ask the question, which by the way, I did this when we were together over at Conga. I asked the sales engineering team there, what is it that your customers care about the most? And you got all sorts of answers that were all pretty smart and all of them wrong. And what customers care about the most is themselves, right? So I think if you can relate your story and what it is that you're selling to their business and their benefit, you're on the wrong track. So I think that you've got to be able to relate your story pretty quickly to where that company is, what they're dealing with, and what pains you can solve potentially for them, or you're just on the wrong track. I think if you're selling to a RevOps leader, you just got to know that they're getting hit 7,000 times a day, every single day, from every single company out there trying to sell something. And these tools, these cadence tools, have caused a proliferation of that to where it's really hard to know what to pay attention to. And so if you're going to make that call, don't forget the cute antics of, hey man, this call is totally unsolicited, blah, blah, blah. Like just get to the point of, dude, hey, look, be a person. I think it's really important to just be a person and say, hey, look, here's what I know about your company. Here's what I think I can do to help solve that. And are you interested in having a chat? And the answer to that, maybe no, it may be not right now, but the worst answer is maybe. So I think get to the yes, let's have a follow-up call, or get to the no and move on. But don't make it because you weren't clear in articulating what it is that you do and what value you provide. And don't make it because you were lazy and didn't want to research the company. Know who you're selling to, understand what pains they're likely dealing with. If they're a public company, look at their 10Ks, do the work related to their business. And the more relevant you are to them, the more likely that's going to go. So
You heard it here first. You need a strong point of view prior to reaching out. You need to have a strong why and a strong why now when reaching out, right? Thank you for that, Jeff. So the last thing I want to touch on, I know we got 5 minutes here. So before we wrap up, Adam had a really awesome story around automation. We keep bringing up automate everything and everything like that. So you brought up a really great story about someone that you interviewed. So I'd love for you to share that story because I thought it was pretty awesome and how important it is to be authentically you.
Yeah. And Sean, it's funny. By the way, that snippet of Jeff, that was amazing. Like that's the podcast. But a lot stood out. And when he talks about like how engagement tools are almost like singeing the market or attempting to boil the ocean, I agree. It's not about more, it's about higher quality. And again, what is quality? Quality is you stand out. And in addition to that, you add value and it's not self-serving. It's not, hey, take a meeting because I have a quota. It's take a meeting because, hey, Jeff, I think we can help your business based on what I know. And these are the things that I know. And if those things are right, guess what? Jeff's going to sit there and say, holy crap, I'm going to spend some time with Adam. And that's how you start a sales cycle built on trust, right? The quote that I lean into, Chris Orlov was one of my early mentors at Gong. He said, you can describe a buyer's problem better than they can. That's instant credibility, right? So that's lean into that. And you can't do that. There's no way to cheat it. Now, you talk about 10Ks, do the research, use AI to read a 10K for you. That's one thing that I think is a great use case, right? Summarize it. Give me the bullet point, right? That's a good example. But the key is break through the noise and be specific. I interviewed someone recently and asked them, how do you stand out as being one of the top BDRs? His LinkedIn had it was always the top 2 out of 16 out of 20. And he said, my secret was I'd find people on Spotify. Everyone has a public Spotify account. It's like 80% of people have public Spotify accounts. You can see their favorite artists. And I buy a vinyl record and I send it to them and I write a note about how that artist, there's something you can tie to a song or that artist, or maybe they want to grant, it's something along those lines. And you can tie it to their business and what you know about their business and their pain. He goes, and it never missed. It just like always hit. And it's funny, it's gimmicky, it's a little bit cheesy, but at the end of the day, like, I'm sure Jeff received that. We take the call, right? Like it's those little things and AI is not doing that. Everyone's batch and blasting. Go the opposite direction. So yeah, that was something that stood out to me.
Jeff, would that book a meeting with you?
yeah, start sending me the YouTube vinyl. Yeah, absolutely. That's super creative. Yes.
Yeah, I think in this day and age, you need to be authentic, you need to be you, but you need to be different as well. And those are the people that are successful right now from an outbound prospecting standpoint. Forget about the 1,000 emails. That one record label that gets delivered will most likely get a response. I wonder what the conversion rate on that was, Adam. I'd love to hear what that conversion rate was compared to phones, emails, everything like that. Let's jump into one last topic. We talked a little bit about collaboration between AEs and RevOps. As an AE leader, Adam, I'd love to get your perspective. How often are you collaborating with RevOps and what does that collaboration look like? Where do you feel like they can help your team? So on and so forth. With the 1 minute and 45 seconds, sorry to make.
I'll give you the truncated version. My team's job is to close business, right? And to do it in a way that's ethical and we're bringing on customers that are a good fit. I think of RevOps almost how I think of umpires. I'm a baseball fan. The better they are, the less you notice them. Like when they're humming and doing an amazing job, you just don't even think about it. I go to them when something's broken or there's a massive inefficiency or a bottleneck. I do go to them to say thank you as well. But when our RevOps team is so well oiled that like you forget about it, and it's like, holy crap, that was so smooth. So I think that's a huge thing and same with enablement, right? You go to them with, okay, we're having issues in these specific areas. And the beauty is when things are going well, I love what Jeff said about being proactive. It always feels like they're one step ahead. I have much more to comment on here, but I'll leave it at that.
Definitely. And with that, we want to thank everyone that has attended here today. Hopefully you got a ton out of today. I definitely did. And then I want to thank our guests, Adam, Mike, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining here today. Really appreciate having you. And the recording will be sent out tomorrow, as Anthony said in the chat there. Really enjoyed this conversation. Hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you guys.
Sarah, take care.